Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Todd Shaw. I serve as the lead learner for the SCEA Center for Educator Wellness and Learning. We call ourselves Cool. You can find more about us at cool.us. That's CEWL.us. You can find all the resources we have that are aimed at improving the inner and outer lives of educators. Tonight, I have a very special guest, actually two guests. Um, I worked with Rona Neely at the Center for Educator Recruitment, Retention, and Advancement for a few years. And her daughter is also going to be on tonight. And um, Rona wrote an amazing play called A Daughter Scorned. And it talked about some of the things that she has gone through, some of the her life experiences, and I thought it was such a wonderful wonderful play. And she has spoken publicly about some of the things that she's gone through in her life, some of her experiences, and how she's healed from that. And I think her story is really, really powerful. And so Rona agreed to come on tonight with her daughter, who's a behavioral health clinician, to talk about trauma and to talk about ways that we can heal. So I hope that you'll really enjoy this conversation. I do want to um, give a warning to our audience watching tonight. We may be talking about some things that are difficult if talk, and I don't know exactly every area we're going to get into, but if talk of abuse and some other things is potentially triggering for you, just want to give that warning to everybody. When we talk about trauma, it can be very, very difficult for some people. And so if at any point during tonight's session you feel uncomfortable, we would just encourage you to go ahead and log off. But without further ado, here is Rona and her
Hello.
Kiyania. Rona, how are you doing tonight?
I am doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Kiyania, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I want to thank you both for your willingness to come on and talk about this story. I'm reading a really great book, and it's called The Four Pivots. It's by Dr. Sean Ginwright. And one of the things that I just read today, he said there's this thing called testifying, right?
Mhm.
He said to testify is akin to a truth-telling ritual that is both intensely personal and magnificently public. The dance between the two, a personal story of overcoming trauma and
Mhm.
troubled waters, and witnessing the story together forms an elixir of healing for both the teller and the listener. And
Wow.
I want to tell you that every time when I saw your play, The Daughter Scorned, and when I've heard you speak, I think the power of that, of your testifying to what happened and how you healed, is, I know that it's been healing for you, and I want you to know that I think that it's, and I'm sure you know, that it's also incredibly healing for other people to hear this story. So I want to thank you for both of you, for the courage to talk about this and to be open about it, because a lot of people feel like we have to hide this stuff that's happened to us,
Yes.
and then that just perpetuates this transmission of intergenerational
Right.
trauma. So I'm going to let you start, Rona, just to talk about the story and let you sort of unpack what we're going to be talking about tonight, and then we'll bring.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Todd. Well, for anyone who has heard the story, you know that my life has been, my childhood experiences have been very traumatic. When I think about the ACEs, or the adverse childhood experiences, there's like 10. And I experienced all 10. So we're talking sexual abuse, we're talking physical abuse, emotional neglect, abandonment, incarceration, drug addiction in the family. And I could go on. I know I'm not naming all 10, but I experienced all 10, whether it was directly or indirectly. I experienced it. Being the child of two addicts. My father was a heroin addict and an alcoholic, and my mother eventually turned to drugs and became a crack addict. And so, me experiencing those daily experiences was a lot. To be quite honest, I did not even realize that it was trauma. To me, it was the norm. It was what you did, how you survived every single day. Waking up, you don't know where you're going to wake up. You don't know where you're going to spend the night. You don't know if you're going to eat from one day to the next. And so it was a lot. I don't know if you want me to go too much into the story, but
Whatever you're
it
comfortable
was
sharing.
it was full of trauma. I'm sorry.
I said whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Yeah. So I'll kind of start from the beginning. Like I said, my father was a heroin addict, and he was also incarcerated when I was 10 months old. He was released from prison when I was 7. But by then, my mother had moved on. She had married someone else who was physically abusive almost on a daily basis. I witnessed my mother being abused. And eventually, after 2 years, we escaped that abuse and we moved from Virginia, DC area to the South where my maternal grandparents were. And so that's where we resided until my mother um, found herself in another abusive relationship. Instead of it being physical abuse or drug abuse with this particular person, it was sexual abuse, where he preyed on young girls. And as I say, she had two daughters. And so just going through that experience and then another abusive situation and the family being, broken up, and some family members accepting what had happened, some of them brushing it under the rug, some of them telling how, making my sister stay quiet, and my mother just kind of conforming to this is her new life. And then from there, she turned to drugs. And that's when she became a crack addict. And that was in the mid to late 80s. I was approximately 12 or 13 years old. And that's when everything just broke loose. We had anything that would come with the drug abuse, the physical abuse followed, the abandonment, being gone for days, weeks, and months at a time, coming back in, leaving again. My father's in and out of prison, both of them in and out of shelters. So it was a lot being raised by my grandparents who were struggling already financially. They're living on a fixed income. And so there were many times we did not have food. I would eat at an aunt's house and things like that. But my grandfather did the best that he could with what he had. My grandmother did the best that she could with what she had. And so thankfully, I'm here today to be able to share that story. But it was definitely, it's a miracle that I am here today.
Yeah, one of the things that when you spoke about this, that I thought was powerful too, was the different people that came into your life
Hmm.
to heal. And this is the message really I want educators to hear,
Yes.
is the importance of not just looking at students in terms of academic achievement, but
Yeah.
knowing that so many of our students are coming into our schools
Yeah.
dealing with these adverse childhood experiences, and how can we create an environment of healing for them, not just say our only relationship is to get you through this curriculum so you can pass
Yeah.
this test. It's like the whether we wish schools could just be about academics, we wish
Right.
society that adverse childhood experiences didn't exist.
Right.
The reality is that they do, and so many
Hmm.
people are coming into our schools. So talk a little bit about, and then I want to bring Kiyania on.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about some of those healing relationships and how that helped you through all of this trauma that you were experiencing.
Absolutely. Todd, it was a collaborative work. My grandparents had to have people to come alongside of them and assist them in getting me where I needed to be. In addition to me, there were probably 6 or 7 other grandchildren that they were trying to raise. And so it took church members, it took the community, it took teachers coming alongside of them and making sure that they were all on the same page to make sure that I did make it to the desired end that they saw for me. I didn't see the potential that I had in myself. I was angry. I was frustrated. I was broken. I just gave up on myself. I gave up on life. I did not understand why my parents would choose drugs over me. I did not understand why they were not there. And even though my grandparents were doing everything that they could, they were providing the best that they could, it didn't seem to be enough. It wasn't what I was needing. I needed the mother and the father. I needed the nurturing. I needed the love. I needed all of those things from my mother and father. And so about 13, 14, I just turned into this rebellious, angry teenager. And I was literally wilding out. And I just gave up on life. I gave up on myself. And at 16 years old, I got pregnant. At 16, I got pregnant, and I was ready to quit school. I was ready to just settle for what everyone said I would be. And that was just like my mother, just another, statistic, another person that is living off of the system, another person that's going to find herself in prison or on drugs herself. So I was just preparing for that life. Right. And then, as I said, it was people, and I'm gonna talk specifically to teachers because school was my safe haven. I knew that when I was at school, I was going to eat. I knew that I would have a breakfast. I knew that I would have a lunch. I knew that I was safe. I knew, no one was going to get into a fight or I had to help my mom fight. I could be a child.
Right.
I could be a child. I could just be free. And so I remember a fifth grade teacher. I will never forget her. My children know who she is. I think my grandchildren even know Mary Fortune. Mary Fortune was that fifth grade teacher. She did not have a clue of what was going on in my household. She did not know about the physical abuse, the sexual abuse. She didn't know that the food stamps had been sold and there was no food in the house. She didn't know that the lights had been turned off. She had no clue about those physical things that I was going through. But she knew me. She knew me. She knew that something was off. And I remember her so clearly where she would just reach, Rona, what do you need? Are you okay? If you need anything, I'm right here. It was like an angel that was just here on earth just for me. Mary Fortune was patient. She was calm. She was considerate. She allowed me to have a voice. She allowed me to have choice. She didn't come at me hard. She didn't come at me forceful, trying to,
Right.
exert her power and authority over me. No, she saw me as a person, a human being, not just, okay, well, you're going to do this or else.
Right.
And so Mary Fortune, like I said, fifth grade. And then when I was in the 11th grade, transitioning into 12th, and I was pregnant, I was a 16-year-old pregnant child with no mother, no father to guide me. I had aunts and I had uncles, I had grandparents, and then I had John Hendricks. John Hendricks was he was a history teacher, and I was prepared to give up on life, give up on everything, as I said earlier. I was ready to quit school or be kicked out of school. It didn't matter to me at that point. My dream of becoming a teacher that I had when I was 9 years old, it was gone. It was gone, long gone. I threw that out of the window. I didn't see the possibility of me ever being able to fulfill my dreams. And he said, absolutely not. See, this is where he had to meet me where I was. He says, I know what you want me to do. You want me to kick you out of school. You want me to give up on you, but I'm not.
Mm-hmm.
He was determined. He met me where I was and refused to let me quit. He refused to let me quit. And so coming alongside of my grandparents, they needed that support at that time because I was rebellious. I was ready to give up. Right. So they needed that support from teachers to say, Mr. and Mrs. Williams, we got her here at school if you got her at home. That's what it means to take, where it says it takes a village.
Right.
And so I always say this, Todd, and I know we're going to let Kiki come in here, or Kiyania, where kids need teachers who care.
Mm.
And it's not just a word that we throw out there to say, oh, I care about my students. Do you care? C, I'm going to make this into an acronym. C, do you see connect? Do you connect with your students outside of the standards,
Hmm.
outside of the testing window? Do you connect with the child? Do you know what's going on in their lives? Do you connect with who they are in and out of the classroom? Do you know that their grandfather just had a triple bypass surgery? Do you know what's going on in the affect? Teachers need to have an impact on their students so strongly that they will never forget them. Here I am, 52 years old, and I still remember Mary Fortune and the impact that she had on my life as a 9-year-old. As a 9-year-old, and I'm 52 years old. So we need to have, and we need to affect our students, or we need to respect them.
Mm.
Respect them for where they are. Respect them for where they come from. And you not hold that against them and say, oh, okay, well, his mama is a drug addict. Her mama is an
Right.
alcoholic. Oh, that whole family. No, we have to respect the child as an individual. Give them voice. Allow them to be heard. Allow them to express, validate their feelings and their emotions. That is respecting the child, not saying, well, I'm in control. I'm in charge of this classroom. You're going to do what I say, as I say, when I say. No.
Yeah.
Respect them. And expect something. We have to set high expectations for our students, as John Hendricks did. Set high expectations and then meet them where they are and bring them to the expectation. Help them rise to your standards and your expectations. So how did I make it? I had teachers who cared. I had family members who cared.
Yeah. Kiyania, you're a behavioral health clinician, which I think is really a beautiful like way to look at this. Is like you've seen this, you've heard your mom's story. I'm sure you know a lot more about it.
Mhm.
As you hear your mom talking about this story, what are some things that are coming up for you?
Um, I guess for me, like you said, I've heard her story. And it's really mind blowing to me that I am a therapist that interact and encounter a lot of clients and patients who have experienced some type of trauma, that being physical, emotional, sexual. And like one of the comments, I think it was from Marcella, stated that nearly 60% of children are exposed to some type of trauma, right?
Yes.
And then going deeper than that, that percentage also they experience that by the age of 16.
Mm.
Mm.
So with that, we have to understand, okay, these kids are school age kids.
Yeah.
And so everything that my mom had experienced happened while she was in school, which puts you in a position as an educator to say, okay, I may not understand, but I should be able to empathize.
Yes.
And so hearing her story as a therapist, it's like, okay, I'm able to, I didn't experience what my mom experienced, but as a therapist, it gives me a different perspective on how to empathize with, those that have experienced traumas that I have not.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really powerful about what you're doing, Rona, is there's this concept of transgenerational transmission of trauma. And what happened, it just, and I'm sure, Kiana, maybe you can speak about this, but you have a grandparent, and they
Mhm.
create traumatic
Yes.
conditions for their child, and that just keeps getting passed down.
Yes.
And a lot of the reasons, I think one of the main reasons why it keeps transmitting is because there's no one really with the
Mhm.
courage to be
Yes.
vulnerable enough to speak about it and seek help, and to sort of saying it's going to end with me. Like
Yes.
I'm going to do what I can not to transmit that. And I think,
Mhm.
like, I think about my kids, and I haven't been through, I don't want to compare what I've been through with you, but I have my things, my neuroses and other things,
Right.
anxiety, that I'm trying not to pass along to my kids, but
Yeah.
inevitably they're picking up on some of that. But like, I think it's such a powerful, your story's so powerful because it shows that if we can
Mhm.
disrupt that
Yes.
sort of lineage of trauma, that we can help liberate our children and their children. So
Yes.
Kiyania, can you talk a little bit about that, like about the importance of disrupting trauma and what it takes to do that?
Yeah. One, I want to preface that it's very hard. I can use my mom for example. I want to applaud her because once I became a therapist, and even before I became a therapist, I always harped on her seeking a therapist. And I think it took a long time. One, because once you experience trauma, there's a chemical change in your DNA, like to where it's like, okay, no, this is how I've been operating. Like I've been surviving, so I'm gonna continue to survive. So with her being in that survival state, it took her a long time to understand, like, okay, what I'm doing is also impacting my offspring. And so I think understanding for someone that has experienced trauma, that what you're experiencing is not easy to, overcome, but also realizing, okay, if I continue to carry this with me, I'll carry it into the next generation, and that generation will carry it to the next. So being able to speak on that trauma is highly important, but it is a challenge for sure.
Yeah. Rona, you one of the things that I have read about trauma is sometimes young people who are abused will internalize a sort of sense of shame around that, and it's counterintuitive to me to think about like a child feeling like they're being abused by this attachment figure, and rather than thinking, oh well, obviously it's the abuser in the situation that's the
Mhm.
problem. The child can internalize this sense that maybe there's something fundamentally wrong with me, that I deserve this because other kids aren't
Yeah.
experiencing this, so maybe there's something broken and maybe I deserve this, and then carrying that kind of mentality into relationships in their adulthood. Can you speak about that a little bit? What your experience
Absolutely.
with that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Again, I didn't think that I was, I guess, per se, doing anything out of the norm. People would tell me all the time that I did not know how to manage and maintain relationships. I could always have a relationship. I could create relationships because I'm a very charismatic person and I'm going to be the life of the party, right? But maintaining relationships was always hard for me. And I didn't understand what the problem was. I didn't understand. It's like, well, something is wrong with them because, I'm just who I am. Right. And so I didn't really understand what the problem was until I was maybe 50 when my daughter said to me, you should consider speaking to a therapist and just learning how to look at things from a different perspective. And it helped me to realize that there are some things that I am doing, patterns of behavior that I picked up from my mom,
Mhm.
from my dad, that I am transferring into relationships. You know, just friendships or family relationships. As someone said, bleeding on my children, bleeding on the people who did not cut me. I would lash out at people. I was very sensitive to anything that people would say. But I did go through a period of time, Todd, when I thought something was wrong with me because when I looked at my relationship with my mother, I knew that that was abnormal
Right.
because I saw other people and their relationships with their mother, and I knew that was not what we had. I hated Mother's Day. I was looking for a different kind of Hallmark card. I never could find one that fit our relationship, right? And so I thought something was wrong with me because I did not see her treat my sister the way she treated me. I did not understand what the issue was with me. And it was only through some healing, some a process of healing, going to a weekend getaway, which was a part of, which actually initiated this whole healing process. Um, I realized that it was not even about me.
Yeah.
It was not even about me. That's when I realized her story. That's when I realized that her mother had also abused and abandoned and neglected her. And then that's when I realized, when I dug a little deeper, that my grandmother had experienced the same type of abuse and neglect and abandonment from her father. So it was generational.
Right.
It really had nothing to do with me. My mother was only doing what had been done to her, you
Yeah.
know?
one of the things that I really loved about when I went to see A Daughter Scorned is it feels like you were liberated by being able to forgive. And I can imagine how hard it is for people who have been abused to
Yeah.
look at their abuser and be able to grant grace and forgiveness for that. But I think it probably does what you just said, understanding what that person has gone through,
Hmm.
that it's not like that abuse didn't happen in a vacuum,
Right.
that there were events and conditions that preceded that.
Yes.
Um, do you feel that sense of liberation when you were able to forgive?
Yes. And forgiveness is that's a huge word. Um, as I said in my stage play, I think I had the angel nurse to say this, that it's like peeling an onion, peeling back an onion one layer at a time. I had to forgive my mother daily and probably hourly, because there were things when I was in her presence, even up until the time she took her last breath. There were things that she would do that would trigger me, that would take me back to when I was 12. The way she would handle me, even while I was caring for her on her deathbed, it was like, okay, but I was able to have some grace for her. I think that's the word. I think even after her death, I'm still forgiving.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to find that place of forgiveness even after she has passed on and has transitioned. And we had our time before she passed away to have closure. But there are some things. That's why I say that forgiveness word is huge. It is huge because it's a daily, hourly practice. I know it is for me. I have to forgive her for every offense, and then also the impact of every offense, right? I have to offend her for what she did and then for the effects of what she did.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's deep. It's very deep.
Kiana, like one of the things that I know about people, even people I'm close to, is this hesitancy to go into therapy because it's almost like they feel like, well, I have to admit that there's something wrong, and I'd rather just like use the coping strategies that I've developed over time. Um, Talk about the importance, why therapy is so helpful for somebody who's experienced this kind of trauma. Like, why specifically does someone need, or should they consider therapy?
Um, I agree with what you said. Therapy is hard to finally say, okay, I think I'm doing this. I think the the importance of it um, is being able to one acknowledge that pain, to not have to continue to live in that trauma, and once you are able to acknowledge it, I think it helps into, your connections with people. Like Rona mentioned, she felt like she was fine. But in a lot of times when you're experiencing trauma, your responses and your answers are out of your lens of whatever that trauma may be. So I think the importance is one to have that non-biased person that you can go and talk to, because a lot of times when we do experience trauma,
Yeah.
we may try to lean on that friend, or we may try to lean on that person that we think, oh, okay, yeah, they got my back, but a lot of times they may not have that professional help that you may need, or those resources that you may need. There's nothing wrong with having that friend that you can talk to, but I think the importance of therapy is just having that safe space, that
Mhm.
connection with a professional that's able to provide you with those resources to help you navigate life through trauma. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Rona, your story is a beautiful story. When you think, when I look at your family, you've got these beautiful children and grandchildren, and and it's such a powerful story. Um, for people who may right now be watching, who are going through something similar, whether it's like in an abusive relationship, or or they've experienced abuse and they haven't processed it yet. Um, what's your message to those people? Where do they start?
I think you would need to start with some self-reflection, or at least trying to see. Um, it's going to be hard to see yourself, like Kiana just said, through a lens that's broken. You're going to still see that shattered perspective. But finding a safe space, a safe person, someone who can give you truth, someone who can help you navigate, whether that be, in my case, it had to be a therapist, someone who was not too close to the situation, because I could not receive, even though my daughter is a therapist, obviously she's too close to the situation and
Right.
I could not receive from her. So you find that therapist, you find that safe place and that safe space of where you are able to be open and transparent so that the healing can begin. Like I said, my journey started, I had to go away for a weekend and just get away from my daily life and daily responsibilities so that I can at least hear what I needed to hear. And then that's where the process started. I would also say start journaling.
Mm.
Right. If you don't feel comfortable talking to anyone, write. That's where a daughter scorn stage play originated. It was just me scripting, writing a note to my mother of what I truly felt, writing a
Mm.
note to my deceased father of what I truly felt. So starting there, just writing, okay? And this, of course, you're going to fill yourself with, read books. Like the book you just talked about. I mean, I have a couple of books here. Viola Davis, Finding Me. Oprah Winfrey just released a book here. Like, find some books and just start reading, and just allow yourself to receive whatever you can receive, however you can receive it.
Yeah. Like one of the things that really stands out also about your story is when you talk about how during your teen years you started to act out. And one of the things that we know about this wounding that takes place is it disconnects us from the authentic self.
Yeah.
And so you put on this mask of, like, I'm not going to show any vulnerability here. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to be
Yeah.
pissed off. And then putting on this mask of strength and like a
Yeah.
shield myself. And then you become further and further disconnected from the authentic version of Rona. Kiyania, can you talk a little bit about that, about how trauma impacts, particularly from the lens of like a teacher seeing a student exhibit maladaptive behavior and immediately wanting to judge and
Mm.
not understanding sort of like what's underneath that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Mhm. Yeah. So I think when it comes to trauma, like you mentioned, it does make you create a sense of, it's like a guard you put up. So it puts you in a survival state to where you're not in a calm state to where you can be your normal self. So you operate in survival, which then
Mhm.
creates a guard of, okay, this is who I am because I don't want you to know who I am,
Right.
right? So in getting back as a therapist, um, for example, if Rona as a child was to walk into my office with this, survival state, it would be more so of trying to create a sense of safety, to help her find out who she is. That's being able to identify her values, identify, okay, what does Rona like? What does Rona not like? Because being in survival for so long, sometimes you forget who you really are. And sometimes people come into my office and it's like, I don't know who I am.
Yeah.
And that's because they've been in survival mode all their life.
Mm.
And so getting back to that point of helping them to identify who they are, what they like, and that could take a while. I've had clients that I've had them create a running list. When you notice things that you like, put it in your notes.
Mm.
Hey, I really liked when I spent time with my friends and we went out and grabbed ice cream. Or
Mhm.
I didn't like when it was a whole group of people and everybody was yelling and screaming. And
Yeah.
then bringing it back to a safe space where it's like, okay, what about that situation did you not like? And so I think that helps to create a space for them to where it's like, okay, now I'm getting back to identifying who I really am
Mhm.
versus who I am when I'm in a survival state.
And
That's
this is such an important point for teachers to understand, is that there can be some triggers that you're not even aware
yeah.
of. There was a
Yep.
story I heard of, it's in the book, What Happened to You, with Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah
Mhm.
Winfrey, wearing some type of Old Spice deodorant
Mhm.
that his abusive father had worn, and
Mm.
that was triggering his behavior.
Yeah.
And no, like this child didn't even know it, and a lot of times the kids don't even know that
They
this
don't.
thing is a particular trigger. So
Right.
this is like the mindset, and it's really hard as a teacher when you've got 25, 30 kids in your class. You want them all to behave and
Mhm.
just give them
Mhm.
a lesson, but we also have to recognize the reality is that so many of our kids are coming in with these experiences that they've had, and rather than having this judgmental mindset around the behavior,
Yeah.
if we can if we can shift to a more curious mindset of like what's
Yeah.
going on here, what's underneath
Right.
the behavior, maybe
Yeah.
we can undo it. But we have this retributive form still mentality
Yeah.
of punishment, that the kid just
Mhm.
needs to be punished enough, and then their behavior will modify instead of really getting to the root cause of the behavior. And so,
Yeah.
Rome, what I love about when you talk about your story is these teachers that actually did help you. They didn't beat it into you with some type of
No.
draconian discipline. It was let me really build a relationship of
Yes.
trust, which is also foundational for these kids,
Mhm.
because they don't, they're not going to grant trust
Right.
because their caregivers and attachment figures have violated trust. So why
Exactly.
would I give trust to a teacher automatically
Mhm.
just because they're my teacher? Just
Mhm.
because they're an adult, I'm going to trust and respect this person when all the other when so many of the adults in my life have not been trustworthy, and I can't respect them. So it's like, talk about that, Rona. I'm going
I
on.
mean, I see it often. I have been in education, public education for 20 years. This is my 20th year. And some of the things that you just mentioned, you see, and it just frustrates me to the core when I see that it's like what you are doing is triggering the behavior. Like,
Right.
you are not creating a safe space for them. Allow them their space. If they're in a survival state, they're trying to am I safe? They're going to figure out what they need to do to make sure that they are safe, and that's when we're going to get that physically aggressive behavior. And so if we're coming in at them, what is your problem, and your tone and your proximity, even like, right? We're not even giving them personal space. We're all in their face. We're leaning into them, our tone, our body language, all of that could be a reminder or a trigger of what's happening at home.
Yeah.
And we're not even thinking about this child does not feel safe not because of what may have just happened in the classroom. Now I am the threat.
Right.
If you are the threat, you are never going to be able to get that child to calm down, because they're going to stay in that state. They're going to stay in that survival state, as Kiki said. And then, what we need to see is moving that child from the survival to the emotional and then the executive state. When you think about conscious discipline, that's exactly what we should be doing. But we just try to go in and we're trying to force something and we're trying to make them talk. They're not going to talk. That's when they start shutting down, right? Then they start crying because they don't know what to do with those emotions, because the trigger is still there. The threat is still there. Now you are the threat. So when we move them from that survival to the emotional, that's when you may see them start crying. And what
Mhm.
do? Stop crying. What are you crying for?
Right.
But that's actually progress from them moving from that survival state to the emotional state. Now, at least they are trying to talk. But what do? Shut up. You're lying. Just be quiet. I'm calling your mom. You just took their voice from them. What did you do now? You just sent them right back. They regressed right back into the survival state. So how can you expect them to function in the executive state of mind, where that frontal lobe, where they can reason and they're rational? They'll never get there.
Right.
Right. And we're thinking about, well, make sure you do well on the test. We have testing this week, but they're still in the survival state.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
So I would definitely speak to teachers and say we need to be more trauma informed and trauma uh responsive. Like, we need to be informed so that we know how to respond
And,
appropriately.
and and Kiana, I'd like you to comment on this. I would say that needs to start with the adults in the building,
Yeah.
working with their own trauma, because
Yeah.
it's almost impossible to be trauma sensitive to students when you haven't
Ooh.
managed or confronted your own trauma.
Yeah.
Kiana.
Yep. Yep. I agree. And I think working with adolescence is my niche. And I work with a lot of adolescents, and I usually gravitate to them, and they gravitate to me. But a lot of times, the main thing that I get from the clients that I work with is the people that they encounter that also are dealing with their trauma.
Yeah.
And mainly it's their parents.
Mhm.
Then it's the teachers.
Mhm.
And so not only do the teachers need, that, be trained to be trauma informed, but also, recognizing like the parents maybe being brought into these schools
Yes.
to be trained as well alongside the teachers and say, okay, this is what your child is experiencing. Like how much are you impacting this, or how much of this is, coming from the top,
Yeah.
flowing down. So I totally agree with
Yeah,
that.
I've heard also sometimes educators will go through trauma informed education,
Mhm.
but then the bus drivers, the custodial workers, the other people,
Mm.
the front office staff haven't.
Yes.
And then they're triggered by some other adult, and then so like
Wow.
this is like a systemic trauma informed lens that has to happen, which
Yeah.
is why it's so important that with this kind of training and
Yeah.
understanding gets into the hands of all adults, and that there's this what I get frustrated by is we talk about Maslow's hierarchy
Mhm.
in our teacher ed programs.
Right.
When it comes to the actual functional stuff, what we do is we tell kids, okay, go to school, have your bag searched, go through a
Mhm.
metal detector, have
Mhm.
security cameras everywhere, go to
Right.
a class that's overcrowded in this building that's overcrowded, go into like these four-walled rooms, don't ever go outside where your nervous system can reset, stay inside bell to bell, let's stay on track. And then and kids are, it's not like they left
Yeah.
these adverse childhood experiences at the door. It's not like they leave that home. They bring that with them, and then we're not. It's like we're not confronting reality. We want it to be easy. We want them to just be okay and do what we
Mhm.
want them to do, and we don't want them to be bothered with working through the stuff at the bottom part of
Right.
Maslow's. We don't want to be bothered with that. And
Right.
all other than to search their bags and make sure no one's brought a gun or a knife, but it's like,
Right.
but what else have they brought with them? What
Right.
what
Those things that we can't see in their book bags.
right, that's right.
Yeah.
And what are we doing about that? So
Right.
And I
I
think when they're not informed as well, it's like, okay, if a child is not getting those psychological needs met at home,
Yeah.
like, clothing, food, shelter, that emotional support, then school is the last thing on their mind.
right.
I had a client that she would come to therapy after a long day of school, and her day would just be awful. And I'm like, okay, well, talk to me, what's going on? And she was like, well, I was supposed to be at school, taking my exams, but I was focused on the paperwork that I didn't need submitted for my foster care
Yeah.
parent. And I couldn't, and this is like, okay.
Mhm.
And then your teachers don't fully understand that you're in foster care, and that when you go home, you may being beat by the foster parent, or you may not have food, so it's like, if the first need is not met, everything above
Yeah.
Yeah.
is non-existent.
They just don't care about
Yeah.
polynomials when they're worried about where their next meal is going to come from, or
Right.
if mom's safe, or
Right.
if there's going to be violence in their home or community.
Right.
It's crazy that we think that they're going to be able to do that.
Exactly.
And yet there's also this component of, like you said, Rona, that Mr. Hendricks still had those high expectations. So you don't want to have the poverty of like low expectations. Well, they're dealing with trauma, so they're never going to make it. And, I don't have them, like I said, but it's like, how do we mesh both the maintaining these hopes and expectations for young people to make sure that we're pulling them up, but while also understanding their very human needs
Yeah.
that their nervous system and the other components that make them human, we addressing that so that they can be successful in meeting those expectations.
Well, I mean, you said it. You said it earlier when you said that it's whole school involvement. It cannot just be the principal and, his administrative staff. It cannot just be the teachers. It has to be the entire school. Everyone should be informed. We should have trauma informed schools so that we can address these issues and see how these things are impacting our students' behavior and their learning. right? Like it has to be a whole school, because our goal should be to create a space for those kids where it's inclusive, where every student feels safe, where every teacher feels safe, where everyone feels equipped, where everyone feels educated on what's happening here. I mean, you hit it already. You hit it on the head. We just need a transformation
Yes.
in our schools. That's the word. We need a transformation.
Kiyania, I'm gonna let you have the last word here. What have we not covered that we need to talk about, particularly as for educators?
I think to come behind everything you all just said is being able to meet kids where they are. I think a lot of times, and I've worked in the school system as a therapist as well. A lot of times, every child, it seems to be treated the same. As in, okay, you come to class, you do your work. Everybody needs to be on time, not realizing some people don't have transportation. So meeting kids where they are, taking that extra step to understand, okay, maybe I don't know, the full extent of your trauma, but being able to empathize, and not just taking it as, okay, this kid have an attitude every day, like being able to meet them where they are. And I think that's where we've summed up, a lot that happens within, the classroom. And so I would say just being able to meet them where they are. And like you said, not lowering the standard, but setting the standard, but then walking alongside them and meeting that standard.
And providing those resources.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, Kiyania and Rona, I want to thank you both for your time and also for just the courage to be vulnerable and to share truth and to testify to your truth so that healing can continue to take place. I know there's people that are watching this who are in need of hearing this story. And I know that through your play and through the work that you do as a behavioral health clinician, Kiyania, that you're creating healing out of the midst of some trauma that's taken place through generations. And the fact that you're disrupting that is such a powerful and inspirational story. And I want to thank you both for sharing it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Take care, Kiyania. Take care, Rona.
Bye-bye.
All right, and that's Kiyania Brown and Rona Neely. And for those of you who were watching tonight, if you'd like to dive even deeper into this, Rona is going to be at our Trauma-Informed Education Workshop on July 11th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the SCEA headquarters in Columbia. This is a free event for our members. It's $40 for folks who are not members. So another great reason to join now, so you can get to do these kinds of workshops for free. Lunch will be served, and Karen Beeman and Jennifer Dollar will also be there with Rona and myself. Karen and Jennifer operate the Master's in Trauma-Informed Education program at Columbia College. So if you're interested in getting a master's degree in this, Columbia College has a whole program for you, and you can come and learn more about that from Karen and Jennifer. Highly recommend two brilliant minds when it comes to these issues. And Rona, again, will be there as well, so you can meet her then. A couple of other things I want to share with you. We're going to have an Educator Health and Wellness Day. We're going to be doing yoga and mindfulness. Yelena Popovich will be there doing some mindfulness sessions. I'll do yoga with folks. We have Audrey Kalianos, who does Cool Bites. She'll be there doing some nutritional tips for our educators. We have an amazing keynote speaker named Jaleesa White. Powerful, powerful story that she has to tell. And I think you'll really, really enjoy that event. That's going to be on July 19th at Columbia College. For those of you who might want to try out yoga, Alex Del Castillo, he is a middle school teacher here in Horry County. He was the Horry County Rookie Teacher of the Year a couple of years ago. He does something called Cool Yoga. He's a certified yoga instructor, and he does these short, very basic yoga sessions. And you can find that on the Cool Instagram, and I think maybe on TikTok. And we're starting to post those on our website as well. So we invite you to, if you want to try out yoga, it's a really great way to process. I did mindful breathing with folks last night, and yoga is a really great thing when I've got a lot of energy and I can't really do the seated breath work and I need to get some of that energy moving. I love to do yoga. And I also want to remind you of the documentary that we created called Rehumanizing School. You can find that on the website at cool.us/documentary. rehumanizing school. And I'm going to put that website up here for those of you who want to watch. Basically, it was a docuseries that I created about 2 small schools in rural Virginia who are embedding a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. This social emotional learning, really an intimate setting where the needs of the teachers and the human needs of the students are being met. And one of the interesting things as I read this book, The 4 Pivots, that we talk about is we sometimes when we talk about education advocacy, we talk about the symptoms of what's wrong, and we're playing around with the symptoms. And some of the symptoms are teachers aren't paid enough, the classroom sizes are too big, and a lot of other symptoms. And we do have to work on those. And it's not to dismiss those, but we have to figure out what is causing all of these things. What is the root cause of so much of the dysfunction that we have in our public education system? And we can't just talk about eliminating problems, because eliminating problems doesn't get you to health. Like if I have strep throat and I take an antibiotic, understandable, I need to get rid of it, right? I have to get rid of the strep throat, but that doesn't mean I'm healthy. What do I need to do to be healthy? And what we need to do as in education is not just look at removing problems, but look at what do we need to move towards to have a healthy public education system. And so these are some targets that I'm throwing out there on this docuseries. It's called Rehumanizing School. I'm just throwing out these as, hey, maybe these are some targets. These are some healthy targets we could shoot for instead of just trying to eliminate problems. What's something positive that we can envision and move towards rather than just the stuff we need to move away from? So that's why that docuseries exists, and I'd love to hear your feedback. And if you're interested in a screening, we can set that up as well. I want to thank everybody who tuned in. I want to thank Dr. Marcella Weinsnyder, who's also a cool teammate, for tuning in. Sierra Cohen, Trey Neely, Courtney Brown, and to everybody else who tuned in. Thanks so much for tuning in to our session tonight. I do want to again thank Rona and Kiyania for their time and their wisdom and their courage for sharing their story tonight. I hope that it was something that benefited you and that you are inspired by the way I've been inspired by their story. So you guys have a wonderful rest of your evening and the rest of your week. And we'll hopefully see some of you at the Trauma Informed Education Workshop.